Hi everyone, welcome to our second lesson, Resistance Grows, April 20th, 2018. So our objectives and standards explain how the civil rights movement grew across the United States and analyze the tactics used by African Americans to protest segregation. And if you would please take a look at the standards. Our desired result: in what ways did the civil rights movement grow? Okay, so resisting segregation. So on December 1st, 1955, an African American woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up, sorry, that should say her seat. I apologize for that, for a white male passenger on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm trying to fix that here for you. Give up her. Let me just write that in here. There you go. Sorry about that. So yeah, like I said, she refused to give up her seat for a white male passenger on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When she did this, the bus driver threatened to have Parks arrested if she did not move. And when she continued to refuse to not give up her seat, she was arrested. I'll show you a picture of that on the next slide here. But even though this seemed like such a small kind of, thing to do to for protests and things like that, it would eventually kind of start a movement that's going to change civil rights. So here you'll see a picture of Rosa Parks being fingerprinted at the police station after being arrested for not giving up her seat to a white person on the bus. So news of the arrest quickly spread, and many wanted to organize to protest. So members from the African American community organized the Montgomery Improvement Association, and they choose a local reverend. They chose Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to lead. He was a young reverend, and they chose him to be in charge of this. Again, you've probably seen and heard his name before as well. And this picture here is a picture of, you'll see here, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. right here in the crowd in the march there at the Montgomery bus boycotts in a march here. So he was chosen to lead this kind of protest. On December 5th, 1955, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed a crowd of thousands of people, and his speech sparked a response by the African American community. What they did was they filed a lawsuit, and for 381 days they refused to ride the buses. They organized their own transportation through carpools or other means, and they also got help from other organizations as well to achieve this, to help get around or whatever they needed to do. Finally, in 1956, the Supreme Court declared segregation on buses unconstitutional. So the Montgomery bus boycott proved to African Americans and the world that civil rights could be achieved. And even after threats and a bomb went off at his home, Dr. King Jr. never gave up the fight. One of the things that he was a big believer and supporter of was nonviolence to achieve goals. He was a big follower of Mohandas Gandhi, if you know that name, who led the British nonviolence movement the Indian nonviolence movement in India against the British back in the 1920s and 30s or so. So Dr. King was a big follower and believer in a lot of his policies. But violence is still going to continue against African Americans, as even though they're trying these nonviolence techniques, including the murder of a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till, who was murdered for supposedly flirting with a white woman. So again, just examples of the violence that's going on still against African Americans at this time. So after the bus boycott, King Jr. and the other civil rights leaders joined together in 1957 to form an organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. The goal of the group was to organize nonviolent protest to fight discrimination and segregation. And another organization that emerged from this was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC. A lot of these were college students or younger people will mainly make up this group. And but what this group will do will actually organize one of the most successful protests in the country, and even in the history of our country as well. So the Congress of Racial Equality, we talked about them a little bit during World War II, or CORE. They had used sit-ins in 1942 as forms of protest, but in February 1960, African American university students sat at a segregated lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Um, Again, this was against the policy of the business and everything like that, and of course angered many people. And television crews captured the horrible treatment of these students as people watched them in their homes. I mean, we're talking about these students were spit on, they were harassed, they were called every type of dirty name you can think of. They were, had food thrown in them. They had, condiments thrown in them. They had hot coffee thrown in them. They were pushed and shoved and told to get up and move and things like that. A lot of horrible things, and people watch this in their homes. But the kind of positive side to this is as people watch this, more people decide to join the movement across the country and began sitting in at other restaurants or diners to protest any type of segregation or discrimination.